was a fast 6 months, halfway through the year already, and what stands out on the political front? Andrew, Chantal, Althia, and Rex are all at the table tonight as we go through their picks. Now, this new government, the Liberal government, was all about change. That was the promise. The question is, how much change has there really been? Here's what Justin Trudeau said about that today.
I don't want to overstate things. There is more work ahead of us than there is behind us.
All right. Now, I don't want you to overstate things in your answer, but if you're looking for change, where was the most significant change in this first part of the Trudeau mandate?
I thought the Senate. It's very much an experiment in progress, this so-called more independent Senate, but it had been years since there had been talk about the Senate for reasons other than abuse of spending. And it is clear that this government is going to have to reflect on how it deals and what the relationship with that new Senate is going to be going forward. I don't know if it's going to be good or bad, but it is certainly different from the days when the government ordered and a partisan Senate basically executed.
Andrew.
Well, I mean, it's still early days in the government, so I think it's still a matter of mostly of a change of tone and of style. And I emphasize the word style rather than, say, substance. This government has succumbed, as previous governments have, to the temptation to muzzle Parliament or to break promises or to cut ethical corners. But there's also been flashes of graciousness. There's been the willingness to admit mistakes. And there's been the overall, as I say, tone set by the Prime Minister. And you're seeing that, I think, largely reflected in their continually high popularity levels.
Althia.
I think tone has been the one thing that has really demonstrated change from the Stephen Harper era. The Prime Minister is constantly seen as being open and accessible. Today we had the media press conference. We had him canoeing with regular Canadians over the weekend. He was getting up at dawn to take part in the smudging ceremony. He seems sort of out and about, going to McDonald's like real Canadians, going into restaurants with very little security. So that, to me, has been sort of the appearance of change.
Now, there's a danger that they put so much emphasis on the Prime Minister's persona and putting him on every magazine cover and every TV show, and it's working greatly for them. But people can fall out of love just as quickly as they fall into love. And at some point, if they bank so much on his personal popularity, at some point that may bite them.
Well, it's not only that. It's easy to have the right tone when you're floating over everyone else in the clouds of popularity. But once the rubber hits the road, where the tone goes will be more interesting to watch.
Plus, you got to be careful, picking McDonald's over Tim's. I mean, so that could be a problem. Rex,
I'm in trouble. I agree with all three.
Thank you for joining us.
It is the Prime Minister. I only have one more thing. The contrast with Harper sharpens this particular range that he has. And even though there's not that great a spread of years between them, Trudeau infallibly has a generational appeal, and he has the vitality of everything that's breathing under 50.
Let's talk about victories and fumbles, starting with victories. What was the political victory of this first half of the year?
I would say it was the play of the session, if you will, was the NDP victory in getting the Electoral Reform Committee to be set up along the way that they had set out. Remember when some months ago, Nathan Cullen put out this plan saying they should apportion it proportionally, and it's just sort of floated there for a while. But I think it kind of implanted itself on people's minds so that when the government brought out the committee, the normal way committees are usually set up with the majority of the seats for the government of the day, everyone suddenly went, well, that's not fair. That's dirty pool. I think that the NDP deserves the credit for that.
Althia.
That's a good answer. I went with CPP, actually,
we
because...
don't have to rate each other.
There's a new graciousness of tone.
I went with the CPP because what the federal government managed to do in getting the vast majority of the provinces to sign on Monday is really quite surprising, and that they were able to do that in 7 months, I think is a coup for an expansion to a program. Some people will say it doesn't go far enough, but largest expansion of the program in 50 years. I mean, that's pretty incredible.
Rex.
Excellent observation. I would suggest that it's a continuing performance, but it was consolidated during the last 6 months. Mr. Trudeau, by his almost Goodyear blimp charisma, image and other things, has completely absorbed the NDP. They have no leadership contest going on because the Liberal Party is now the NDP party.
I found that answer lacking.
Well, you're the
that's
host
okay.
here. You're supposed to
It's
comment.
an NDP party, which really...
I know, that's...
Chantal's next, but
Categories.
I want to show something. Remember, this is political victory for the first 6 months. This is the visual to what Chantal's going to tell us here.
Order.
I was elbowed in the chest by the Prime Minister, and then I had to leave.
The elbow incident.
It's a good thing that Andrew had good things to say about the NDP, because I think what the NDP did with that gave Trudeau a win on Elbowgate, and you wouldn't have believed that it would be possible. Of course, his showing remorse and regret 60,000 times certainly helped, but they hyped
Again
it.
today.
But they hyped it so much that in the end, he came out of it in as good or better shape than going in. And the action itself was a really poor action. When we talked about tone, this was a time when things were not going well for the Liberals. And that didn't speak to the great improvement in tone that we've talked about.
All right, but you see it as a victory. Andrew sees it as a fumble, not from the same side of things, but go ahead.
It falls to me as usual to emphasize the negative. I mean, you can look at it that way. You can say there was a golden opportunity for the opposition to let Trudeau wallow in it. I mean, it was vastly overstated by everybody, including the press, but it was very odd behavior in the Prime Minister's part. But I absolutely agree with Chantal. The way that the NDP and the Conservative MPs overreacted to it. I think we saw evidence of this out in the rest of the country. People looked at this and said, "Are you people insane?" Victim impact statements and people saying they were traumatized by it and turning an accidental elbow into an attack on women. It was Parliament's probably silliest hour of this session.
Rex.
Silliest hour.
I'll agree. I won't agree it's the silliest hour, because that involves a discrimination that's too fine to make. But it is true that I don't think either one of them did very well. I thought Trudeau was presumptuous to an extreme degree. He's going to marshal the House Leader of the other party. He's going to elbow people out of his way. And I thought the theatrics and histrionics of all the people playing up this thing. Whenever I hear the word trauma and victim attached to something other than the Second World War, I'm problematic. So no, it was a mess on both sides.
So this was your political fumble of the first 6
For all
months?
of them. For all of them. Yep.
All right, Althia, we want to get Althia's political fumble and some visuals to back it up. Here it is.
Don't let this very divided vote divide us. Let's all work together now to choose the best person to take our project forward.
Tom Mulcair.
Yeah. I don't understand how you can miscalculate that much, and to go to a national convention and essentially get guillotined on stage with a 48% approval rating shows that you have no idea what's going on, and your organizers had no idea what was going on. You're way more disconnected than you thought. My understanding is they thought they were going to get 70. Well, 70 and 48 is a really big difference. So to me, that is the biggest political fumble of the year.
And Chantal, you're in agreement?
I'd pick the same thing. I'd been told that on election night, Tom Mulcair expected to win 50 seats out of Quebec to make up for having lost all of Atlantic Canada. And I wasn't sure I believed that, having covered the campaign and seen what was happening in Quebec. But covering that convention and watching that train slowly but surely roll over the NDP leader, slowly, in slow motion, I have to say that I believe that they can't do math. Because if you were not inside, just talking to delegates, you could see it.
Who took the biggest risk in this first half of the year, and why? Althia.
Dominic LeBlanc, the government House Leader, I think he is primarily responsible for the Liberals mismanaging their House agenda. He's responsible for Elgabogate. He came out of the wings early on declaring C-14, the government's bill on medically assisted dying, was going to be a whip vote. Then he had to reverse himself. He's the one who defended the Democratic Reform Committee with status quo, deciding there was no reason we needed to make this any different. This is just like regular piece of legislation. Then he came out with this Motion 6 that essentially neutered Parliament, giving Cabinet, of all people, the ability to dictate the will of the House of Commons for 3 months because he was upset by essentially Liberals being called on a miss vote. I don't think he was a wise choice for government House Leader. In hindsight, obviously, it's easy to say that. I'm sure he'd rather keep the fisheries portfolio. I wouldn't be surprised if he's out of that job soon.
You know, I tried so hard to keep the gate term out of that whole issue. I lost on that. Rex?
I think the Senate took the biggest risk, whether it will pay off or not. After the Valley of Sorrows that constitutes the Duffy affair, the Senate's reputation being a negative in any estimation whatsoever, when the Liberals through LeBlanc lost somewhat the stewardship of Parliament, the Senate comes around, and I don't know if sober really applies, but we're giving second thoughts to something, and in a dangerous climate, pushing their presence forward. So that was the biggest risk. Whether it will pay off in any long term is something still open.
Andrew?
I'm going to say the Prime Minister's handling of the hostage situation in the Philippines. Obviously, the situation there is much more serious than mere politics. But nothing a Prime Minister does is ever divorced entirely from political considerations or certainly political consequences. And in saying that he would not pay ransom, he must have known not only that he was probably signing their death warrant, but also potentially exposing the government to the risk of a blowback from it. I'm sure he did what he did for principled reasons and principled reasons only, but he would have known also there would have been political risk attached to it.
Chantal?
I picked Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould because in the heat of the end of the debate on her bill on medically assisted death, to get it passed, she stuck her neck way out and guaranteed that the bill was constitutional. She is the Attorney General. This statement is going to be tested in courts. And if she turns out to be wrong or misleading, those clips of her saying, I'm convinced it's constitutional, are going to harm her credibility for a long time.
All right, I want to remind people, because it involves the next question as well, on Jody Wilson-Raybould, the Minister of Justice. Watch this.
To ensure that we also put in place and respect the value of life, protection of the vulnerable.
And I run that again because we're now to the point of who's the minister who impressed you most, quickly, before we have to take a break. Andrew?
I'm going to say Jody Wilson-Raybould, and for that particular issue, not only was it a matter of finding the right sort of sweet spot, if you will, in terms of where public opinion is, where Parliament was, I'm sure also, again, guided by her own convictions and that of the government, but finding the middle ground, I think they did successfully. And secondly, of shepherding it through not only the House of Commons, but also the Senate. And both of those were anything but done deals. And I think she argued her case well.
Rex?
I got to go with the Prime Minister. I don't think any of the front bench acted as a fully energized, competent front bench should be. But Trudeau is so large, the charisma is so deep, that even though you were impressed before, he's still the only one that impressed me.
Here's Althia's pick. Watch.
We are concerned about some amendments which may take away pieces of this bill and not be able to address the ramifications.
Jane Philpott, Minister of Health. Why?
Well, I actually think that of the two ministers who carried C-14, it was Jane Philpott who did the heavy lifting. She's extremely well regarded in cabinet. Her judgment is looked to and deferred to. I think she's a lovely person as well. I think she's really the star that has emerged in that cabinet.
I went somewhere else completely, and I picked Jim Carr, the Minister of Natural Resources, because he's got a leading role in the pipeline issue. And so far, he's been helping rather than hurting the government in a difficult position, because the government's stance on pipelines and how it's going to process decisions is far from clear. But he has not become, remember former energy ministers of Liberal governments whose heads would have been put up for ransom or for a hit in Western Canada. That has not been happening. His answers in the House are always reasoned. He's the opposite of Joe Oliver in that role.
All right. Well, we got to take that quick break that I was talking about a moment ago, but we've got a couple of really key questions still to come when At Issue returns right after this. All right, we're back at it with Andrew, Chantal, Althia, and Rex. We talked about who'd done well. The question now is who has not, in terms of the cabinet, lived up to the hype. Watch this.
The government is moving forward today on modernizing how Canadians vote.
Mariam Monsef, the minister has been responsible for the electoral reform bill. Rex, your pick there.
Absolutely the worst. The stew of inconsistencies and absurdities. The idea that you would decide how Canadians can vote and deny them the ability to vote on how you decide is just ridiculous.
Don't hold back.
I won't.
Okay.
Terse.
Andrew.
I'll say Dominic LeBlanc for all the reasons that Althia said earlier, but this government came in promising to dial down the partisanship, which made Dominic LeBlanc always an odd choice from that standpoint, but he was at least viewed, I think, as a safe pair of hands, and as Althia mentioned, I think he's been anything but in that role.
Both Althia and Chantal picked who we're about to see right now.
Should I become aware of credible information of violations related to this equipment, I will suspend or revoke the permits.
Stéphane Dion talking about the arms deal with Saudi Arabia. Chantal.
Former party leader, a senior minister, probably the most experienced except for Ralph Goodale. And this, there are things that have happened that Stéphane Dion was at the center of, and this issue of whether ISIS is committing genocide is one of those, where it boggles the mind. A rookie minister like Madame Monsef perhaps doesn't do as well as she should, but this is someone who has more experience than just about anyone in the House of Commons.
Althia.
If there's somebody bleeding in cabinet, it's Stéphane Dion. The genocide motion, as Chantal mentioned last week, where the Liberals voted against saying ISIS was committing genocide, and then a report from the UN that we knew was coming because last year they said ISIS might be committing genocide, said we actually think ISIS is committing genocide, forced the minister to stand up in the House like 24 hours later and say, oh, actually now we think that ISIS is committing genocide. He didn't even explain his position while in the House of Commons. The NDP, which voted against the government, did a better job explaining the government's position than the Foreign Affairs Minister.
All right. Conservatives, NDP, both looking for new leaders over the next year. Who's the candidate to watch at this point, Andrew?
Well, on the NDP side, I'm going to go out on a limb and say BCMP Don Davies. And I say that not just because we had a bet on the Stanley Cup in which he chose the Pittsburgh Penguins and I chose another team that let me down, and this was the agreed upon payoff. Actually, no, the real answer is the ones who aren't running. Megan Leslie, Nathan Cullen. This is a party that's in a lot of trouble, and the star candidates aren't running.
That was a wonderful
Aren't
segue.
you glad there's a public broadcast?
That's a wonderful
pay off your
segue.
debts. Chantal.
I picked the Conservatives and Peter MacKay because at this point, with Jason Kenney kind of being tempted by Alberta, there must be Conservatives who are waking up at night thinking, what if the candidates we have now that we think are second tier, Maxime Bernier, Michael Chong, what if that's it? Because if Mr. MacKay doesn't jump in, and I don't know that he will, that might be it.
I'm running out of time. Althia.
Yeah, I think everyone's looking at Peter MacKay. In fact, Deepak Oberoi is soliciting support for a possible leadership run in which he promises that if he loses, he would throw his support behind Peter MacKay.
He's already saying that, even before he's in the race.
So he denies that he says that, but I have it on good authority that that is what he's telling people.
You got the last word, sir.
I go with the NDP, a guy who's not elected and can't speak French, Peter Stauffer. I think he has the personality to at least summon forth some of the ancient virtues of the New Democratic Party.
And no seat.
And no seat, I said that.
Other than that, he's in good shape. All right. Thank you all. At issue, heads for the summer break, but always with the condition that if something big happens, we'll find them no matter what dock they're hanging out at. More still to come tonight, including this.